Well, you see, there's something quite fascinating about certain personality types that demands our attention. The INTJ and INFJ types. They represent something rather unique in the landscape of human consciousness. Now, these are individuals who experience reality through a very particular lens. And this lens, you might say, creates both extraordinary insight and considerable suffering. When we examine the INTJ personality, we're looking at what we might call the architect of the mind. These individuals possess a remarkable capacity for seeing systems, patterns, and future possibilities that others simply cannot perceive. But here's where it becomes interesting. This very gift becomes their burden. The INTJ mind operates like a sophisticated machine that never stops running, constantly analyzing, constantly building mental frameworks for understanding the world. You see, the INTJ doesn't just think about problems. They become consumed by them. They see inefficiencies everywhere, in relationships, in institutions, in the way society organizes itself. And this creates a particular kind of torment because they can envision better ways of doing things, yet they often find themselves powerless to implement these visions on a large scale. Now, the suffering of the INTJ is not emotional in the traditional sense. It's more intellectual, more existential. They suffer from what we might call the curse of competence. They understand systems so well that they become frustrated by incompetence around them. When an INTJ walks into a workplace and sees inefficient processes, redundant meetings, or illogical hierarchies, they don't just notice these things. They feel physically uncomfortable. The INTJ mind craves autonomy and competence, yet the world often demands conformity and collaboration in ways that feel fundamentally unnatural to them. They are strategic thinkers who prefer to work alone, yet society rewards those who can navigate social dynamics and play political games. This creates a constant tension between their natural inclinations and the demands of their environment. But let's turn our attention to the INFJ, because their suffering takes on an entirely different character. Where the INTJ suffers from intellectual frustration, the INFJ suffers from emotional overwhelm. The INFJ possesses what we might call an emotional radar system that picks up on feelings, motivations, and undercurrents that others completely miss. The INFJ walks through life absorbing emotional information from everyone around them. They sense when someone is lying, when a relationship is deteriorating, when there's tension in a group that no one else acknowledges. This creates a peculiar kind of burden. They carry emotional knowledge that they cannot always act upon or share without seeming intrusive or overly sensitive. Now you see, the INFJ doesn't just empathize with others. They actually feel what others feel. This is not mere sympathy or compassion. It's a kind of emotional contagion that can be utterly exhausting. They might walk into a room where everyone appears happy and immediately sense the underlying sadness that one person is hiding. They might have a conversation with someone who seems confident and know instinctively that this person is struggling with deep insecurity. The challenge for the INFJ is that this emotional insight comes whether they want it or not. They cannot turn off their ability to perceive the emotional landscape around them. And because they care deeply about human suffering, they often feel compelled to help, even when doing so depletes their own emotional resources. Both types share certain characteristics that contribute to their suffering. They are both highly intuitive, which means they see possibilities and meanings that others miss. They are both introverted, which means they need solitude to process their complex inner worlds. And they are both judging types, which means they have strong preferences for structure, closure, and meaning in their lives. But here's what makes their situation particularly difficult. They are rare, INTJs make up perhaps 2% of the population. INFJs even less. This means they spend most of their lives surrounded by people who think differently, process information differently, and value different things. It's like being a native speaker of a language that no one else understands. The INTJ might spend years trying to explain their vision for improving a system, only to be met with blank stares or accusations of being too critical. The INFJ might try to share their insights about human nature, only to be told they're being too intense or reading too much into things. Over time, both types learn to keep their insights to themselves, creating a kind of intellectual and emotional isolation. This isolation is compounded by the fact that both types have extremely high standards, not just for themselves, but for the world around them. The INTJ has a vision of how things could work better, more efficiently, more logically. The INFJ has a vision of how people could treat each other with more authenticity, compassion, and understanding. When reality consistently fails to meet these standards, it creates a chronic sense of disappointment and frustration. The suffering of these types is also intensified by their perfectionist tendencies. INTJs often struggle with imposter syndrome, feeling that they must be absolutely competent before they can act or share their ideas. INFJs struggle with the gap between their ideals and reality, often feeling that nothing they do is ever quite good enough to create the positive impact they envision. There's something particularly poignant about the way these types experience relationships. They crave deep, meaningful connections, but often struggle. The INTJ struggles to express emotions in ways that others understand. They might care deeply for someone but express it through actions rather than words, leading to misunderstandings and feelings of being unloved or unappreciated. The INFJ, on the other hand, gives so much of themselves in relationships that they often lose track of their own needs and boundaries. They become so focused on understanding and helping others that they neglect their own emotional well-being. They might spend hours listening to a friend's problems, offering insight and support, only to realize later that they haven't shared anything meaningful about their own struggles. Both types also struggle with what we might call the burden of seeing potential everywhere. The INTJ sees the potential for improvement in every system, every process, every organization. The INFJ sees the potential for growth and healing in every person they meet. While this ability to see potential is a gift, it can also be torturous when that potential remains unrealized. The INTJ might work for years to implement changes in their organization, only to watch as politics, resistance to change, or simple inertia prevents progress. The INFJ might invest deeply in helping someone grow, only to watch as that person continues making the same destructive choices over and over again. This brings us to a crucial question. Is this suffering inevitable? Or is there a path toward greater fulfillment and peace for these personality types? The answer, as we shall explore, lies not in changing who they are, but in understanding how to work with their natural gifts rather than against them. The path forward for these types requires a fundamental shift in perspective, from seeing their traits as burdens to recognizing them as profound gifts that simply need proper channeling. You see, the INTJ and INFJ don't suffer because they are flawed. They suffer because they are trying to function in environments that weren't designed for their particular way of being. Consider the INTJ who spends years feeling frustrated in corporate environments where politics matter more than competence, where meetings accomplish nothing, where the best ideas get buried under layers of bureaucracy. This person isn't failing. The system is failing them. The moment an INTJ finds themselves in an environment where their strategic thinking is valued, where they have autonomy to implement their visions, where competence is rewarded over conformity, their suffering diminishes dramatically. But here's what's particularly interesting. Many INTJs never even attempt to find such environments because they've been conditioned to believe that their way of thinking is somehow wrong or antisocial. They spend decades trying to fit into molds that were never meant for them, wondering why they feel so perpetually exhausted and unfulfilled. The INFJ faces a similar challenge, but from an emotional rather than intellectual angle. They've often been told throughout their lives that they're too sensitive, too intense, too much. So they learn to suppress their natural empathic abilities, to smile when they feel others' pain, to pretend that small talk doesn't drain them completely. But this suppression comes at an enormous cost. It disconnects them from their greatest strength. When an INFJ learns to honor their emotional intuition rather than dismiss it, when they understand that their ability to sense what others cannot see is actually a form of intelligence, their relationship with their own sensitivity transforms completely. Instead of seeing it as a weakness that makes them vulnerable, they begin to see it as a sophisticated instrument for navigating human relationships. Now, there's something crucial we must understand about how these types process information. Both the INTJ and INFJ are what we might call meaning makers. They don't just experience events, they automatically search for patterns, significance, and deeper understanding. This is why surface-level interactions feel so depleting to them. Their minds are constantly seeking substance that simply isn't there. The INTJ listening to a colleague complain about a problem isn't just hearing complaints. They're automatically analyzing the root causes, generating multiple solution pathways, and becoming frustrated when the person clearly doesn't want solutions but just wants to vent. The INFJ in the same situation is picking up on the emotional subtext, sensing what the person really needs, and feeling compelled to provide that deeper level of support, even when it's not being explicitly requested. This automatic depth processing creates a particular kind of loneliness. Both types often feel like they're operating at a frequency that others cannot access. The INTJ has insights about systems and strategies that seem obvious to them but revolutionary to others. The INFJ has understanding about human motivations and emotional dynamics that feels intuitive to them but mystifying to those around them. The loneliness becomes more pronounced when these types attempt to share their perspectives and are met with incomprehension or dismissal. The INTJ who explains why a particular business strategy will fail in 18 months, only to be ignored and then proven right, doesn't feel vindicated. They feel isolated by their foresight. The INFJ who gently suggests that someone's relationship problems stem from deeper communication issues, only to be told they're overthinking things, doesn't feel superior. They feel misunderstood. But here's where their suffering often intensifies. Both types tend to internalize these experiences of being misunderstood. Instead of recognizing that they're simply operating from a different cognitive framework, they begin to question whether something is wrong with them. The INTJ starts to wonder if they're too critical, too demanding, too difficult to work with. The INFJ begins to think they're too emotional, too complicated, too much work for others to handle. This internalization creates a vicious cycle. The more they doubt their own perceptions, the more they try to conform to what they believe others expect of them. The more they conform, the more disconnected they become from their natural strengths. The more disconnected they become, the more they suffer. The INTJ who tries to become more social and emotionally expressive often ends up feeling like they're performing a role rather than being authentic. The INFJ who tries to become less sensitive and more pragmatic often ends up feeling numb and disconnected from their own emotional truth. Neither approach addresses the real issue, which isn't that these types need to change who they are. It's that they need to find contexts where who they are naturally is valued and appreciated. What makes this particularly challenging is that both types are often drawn to environments and relationships that seem to offer what they're seeking, but actually perpetuate their suffering. The INTJ might be attracted to high-achieving environments that promise intellectual stimulation, but are actually dominated by politics and inefficiency. The INFJ might be drawn to helping professions that seem to value empathy, but are actually structured in ways that lead to burnout and compassion fatigue. The key insight here is that these types need to become more discerning about where they invest their energy and attention. This isn't about becoming selfish or uncaring. It's about recognizing that their gifts are precious resources that deserve to be used wisely, rather than squandered in situations where they cannot make a meaningful difference. You see, there's something rather profound that happens when these personality types finally begin to understand their own nature. It's not a sudden revelation, but rather a gradual awakening to the fact that their way of experiencing the world is not a defect to be corrected, but a perspective to be honored and cultivated. The INTJ who has spent years feeling like an outsider in their workplace suddenly realizes that their discomfort isn't a personal failing. It's information. Their mind is telling them something important about the environment they've placed themselves in. When they learn to trust this internal compass rather than dismiss it, they begin making different choices about where to direct their considerable intellectual resources. Now, the INFJ faces a similar but distinct journey of self-recognition. They begin to understand that their emotional exhaustion after social interactions isn't weakness. It's the natural result of processing enormous amounts of emotional data that others don't even perceive. When they stop trying to match the energy levels of those around them and start honoring their own rhythms, something remarkable happens. Their capacity for genuine connection actually increases because they're no longer depleting themselves trying to be someone they're not. But here's what's particularly interesting about both types. They often resist this process of self-acceptance because it feels selfish or antisocial. The INTJ worries that embracing their need for autonomy makes them difficult to work with. The INFJ fears that honoring their sensitivity makes them high-maintenance or dramatic. Yet the opposite is actually true. When these types stop fighting their nature and start working with it, they become more effective, not less. The INTJ who accepts that they work best with minimal interruptions and maximum autonomy doesn't become a hermit. They become someone who can contribute their best thinking to the world. The INFJ who acknowledges that they need substantial solitude to process emotional information doesn't become isolated. They become someone who can offer deeper, more authentic connection when they do engage with others. There's something else we must consider about these personality types. Their relationship with time itself is different. Both the INTJ and INFJ operate on what we might call extended timelines. The INTJ sees patterns and consequences that may not manifest for months or years. The INFJ senses emotional currents and relationship dynamics that unfold slowly over time. This temporal perspective creates another layer of suffering when they're forced to operate in environments that demand immediate results and quick fixes. So you see, the answer to whether these types truly suffer is both yes and no. Yes, they suffer when they deny their fundamental nature, when they try to force themselves into molds that were never meant for them. But no, they need not suffer when they finally understand that their depth, their intensity, their way of seeing the world is not a burden to be carried, but a gift to be unwrapped. The suffering ends not when the world changes to accommodate them, but when they stop apologizing for who they are and begin living from the center of their authentic being.